parents, the child goes to the teacher who will guide that child.
What do you mean by external moral authority? You use that expression a lot.
Materialism has to do with when you are
Hello, it's great to have all of you back for the course in Values and Spirituality. We are currently on the topics of the Ministry of Education's 5-year plans and putting knowledge into practice on page 98 and 99 of book number 1. Sister Denise, thank you for joining us today. Welcome back.
Thank you.
This chapter starts with the following words. Since the 1950s, India's Ministry of Education's 5-year plans have continually extended the scope of education, making universally available education a goal for all age groups and social strata, including the socially disadvantaged. Could you take us through this, please?
You know, these plans correspond to nice idea, nice ideal. But putting that into practice is a bit like election promises. As soon as you get elected, the promise disappears and you do whatever is possible. And these 5-year plans is difficult to actually put them into effect, but there are some goals that do get achieved.
Have there been any states in India that have been successful in this regard?
Well, as you can see from the text, there was a literacy campaign supported by the UN, and Kerala in India does have 100% literacy rate, which is very, very high. Even for a developed country, you will not find 100% literacy. And if you go to Kerala, you will see very, very well educated people, and it's a long-standing culture in that part of South India. So this is special.
Yes, it is. I would now like to go on to the next chapter, putting knowledge into practice. When I read this first line, I enjoyed the wit that you used in formulating the sentence. The child is an ever-attentive witness of adult morality or lack of it. This is quite funny.
Children are very observant, and you know, this is one of the reasons why they get punished, is to make them not voice their observations, because then the adults feel insulted because their hypocrisy is pointed out, and they don't like that.
Are adults aware of how astute children are?
I think they are and they aren't. But because we have a culture of enforcing morality through violence and through threats, a child is pretty quickly taught that any kind of talking back is punishable, and so they will observe, but they won't voice their observations. But what that means is that the adults lose respect in the eyes of the children, and if you don't respect the external moral authority, you're not going to absorb the ideas either.
The next line goes on to say that the child looks for cues on how to behave and finds plenty from parents and teachers as they make choices, address people, and act upon assumptions, desires, and values, thereby telling young observers more than we realize. What comes to mind here is that very few people understand that communication is far more than verbal. There's more non-verbal communication that occurs than verbal. And the children are better at picking up non-verbal cues than verbal cues.
They're very good, but the thing is, they get so punished for these capacities that they end up with quite a lot of moral confusion, and they are diminished in their ability to function normally, and this is a very great tragedy, actually.
So what we are speaking of here is that the problem per se is not with the child, but with the credibility of the adults and the educators, is it not?
Well, it is, because many of the ways of raising children and educating children also happen to be classified as child abuse. So when you abuse a child, then that child goes into trauma, and what trauma does is it creates a survival situation, and then the child will do what is considered to be wrong actions, but the child was trained to do wrong actions through the trauma of child abuse. And this is something that the conventional wisdom has not understood at all. And this is why I say it may be conventional, but it's not necessarily wise.
So, coming back to the credibility of the adults and the educators, tell us where the shift must occur so that the educators as well as the parents can become the examples that they think they already are for the children.
Well, it's really a shift of culture.
What do you mean by that?
We live in a culture that says you must respect people who are older than you, whether they're respect-worthy or not. You must respect people who are senior to you, who are in a position of power over you, and you do not have the right to challenge it. This is the culture that we are in. And it goes together with the system of denying rights to children and the system of punishing children in a way that many people classify as child abuse, but which others consider to be correct and proper. So it's all part of the clash of these archaic social values and attitudes which come from the traditions, the old religions, and on the other side, the more modern view of democratic, liberal, human rights-based values. And so what happens here is that the parents and the teachers either belong to one side or the other. Your parents may belong to the more modern view, but the school is of the ancient social attitudes. And so the children will get one input at home and the opposite input at school. But the parents have a much greater influence than the school. And so the child will consider the school to be just out of date, and it won't really do so much damage. If the parents are very archaic and the school is very modern, the parents will find ways to keep the school in line and prevent them from bringing that influence because of the enormous and extensive power of these archaic social values. So I go back to the idea of chipping away at the system and promoting, supporting the rights of a child, the right to know, the right to express yourself and so on. Because even in a very hostile and traumatic situation, if there's someone who represents a kind of sanity and who cares about the young person, that can be enough to get them across the hump and get them across that trauma. So it's worth doing.
You go on to say that youngsters tend to follow what they see, while things merely heard and not demonstrated will not be imbibed. It is imperative for teachers and parents to behave in the manner which they want their children to behave, in a manner that's not seeming to be judgmental. What I'm saying is that many people, adults, find it difficult to see their own weaknesses.
Of course they do, because this is how they were raised.
Yeah.
and this is how their grandparents raised their parents. So it's a generational thing which is passed down, but each time it hits a new generation, it's slightly less functional. And when it reaches a tipping point of dysfunctionality, it gets so weak that you can challenge it effectively. And I think that this is the point that we are at. So there are many things around TV programs, articles, books, lots of things which are challenging the old ways and saying they don't work, they're out of date, they're irrelevant, thinking is very different now, and so on and so on. So, you know, there's this idea of a bell curve. Have you come across that?
Yeah.
So in a bell curve, you have a small minority sort of pulling towards the future with the new ideas that are coming in, and you have another small minority on the tail pulling back, and then you have the majority in between who will go with whichever is the strongest pull. On the whole, the pull back is stronger, but as time goes by, the pull forward becomes stronger than the pull backwards, because the old people die off and more modern people come in to the world with the new ideas, and so it anyway moves forward. But sometimes you have to allow for the slow progress forward. So I think that we have to be patient, we have to be proactive, we have to support what's coming in, and just keep ourselves optimistic, because we can't allow ourselves to get frustrated, irritated, reactive, because it just is counterproductive.
There are educators and adults who are listening to you right now who realize that which is contained in this particular paragraph applies to them fully, and so they're on the precipice of change. What is your advice for such persons? Where must an adult start to become a good example for a child, given that we're all fallible, we all have weaknesses, we all have quirks in our personalities that we are not proud of, but yet we still want to set an example for the children, our students, as well as our children and grandchildren?
I think as well as setting an example, you have to set a policy.
What policy are you referring to?
You know, there's a situation that happens very commonly. You have parents who behave a certain way, which the children find offensive, and the children say, well, when I grow up, I'm never going to be like that. This happens in dysfunctional family systems. But even promising themselves, I will never be like my parents, they grow up and they do exactly the same thing.
It's called vicarious learning, isn't it?
I don't know if it's called vicarious learning, but I think that the impact of what you grow up in is something so strong that just deciding not to be like that is not enough, which is why you have to have a policy.
Okay.
Policy means you identify the different sets of behaviors that you say you're not going to emulate, and you have to put in a mechanism so that you are your attention is drawn whenever you do that, because otherwise the person goes into denial, because you're doing it on the basis of feeling and reacting rather than what I call a policy. So you have to really create your personal ethical policy, and whenever you see yourself or you give permission to somebody else to draw to your attention, whenever they see you doing that, what you promise not to do, you have to stop and take a look, and then you have to apply your policy. And you do not have the sanskaras of doing the right way. You have the sanskaras of doing the wrong way. So you have the nice idea that I will do it the right way, but you don't have any of the energy, any of the tools, any of the patterns, which means it has to be created. You have to be absolutely conscious in how you do what you do. And I think you have to be very conscious in how you do what you do. And for that, you need a spiritual practice, because that gives you the power and the discipline to be able to notice, to be able to check yourself and change.
That sounds very powerful. It also sounds like a lot of internal work that needs to be done, and not just for a day or two or a year or two. It sounds like a lifetime of work.
Well, this is a continuing education. Part of education for children is it's a fixed number of years, and once you've got your exams, you forget it. Continuing education is for adults, and it means it never stops. You just always think of yourself as a person who has a mentality of learning, and that you consider your whole life to be full of potentials for learning, for improving yourself, and for becoming a better you, a better member of society, a better parent, a better professional.
So that brings us to the end of today's episode. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, there you go. A very rich subject on putting knowledge into practice and the credibility of adults and educators. Sister Denise has taken us through what this means, what challenges the child faces. And what I liked about this particular segment is that Sister Denise looks at education from the vantage point of the child, not the adult, which is a very unusual thing to do, but also very kind, simply because the rights of children are not acknowledged to the extent that they should be. And she does this without placing blame at the door of any single parent or any educator, but simply shares methods as to how one can improve in a way that benefits both the educators, the parents, and the child. So a very powerful message, and many blessings, Sister Denise.
Thank you.
I do hope that you found some benefit in today's lesson, and I do hope to see you again for the next one. Take care and goodbye.